Ever think you might need a little more out of life? Why not try Chasing Diamonds with Andy Corbley, a podcast aimed at bringing out the extraordinary nature of the human experience and the curiosity, wonder, and creativity that drives it. It is his most sincere hope that today's episode tickles your fancy. So now, without further ado, here is your host, Andy Corbley.
Thanks for that, Ron. Mary Corbley is my guest today, and she brings with her a repertoire of travel experiences that trump most humans you will meet. She has traveled around the world, and in doing so worked on yachts from Australia to the Caribbean, managed private islands for the uber-wealthy, and constructed a house with her own hands in the Bahamas where she now resides. Travel is very important to me, you all know this. So in my mind, it was imperative that I have her on to discuss the lifestyle of a traveler, the kind of personality that chooses experience over possession. Welcome, Mary. How are you?
Good, thanks, Andy, and thanks for having me today.
Of course, it's my pleasure. So I just want to start off by saying, so my first question is, when did you know you wanted to travel?
The travel bug hit me in high school. My senior year, I had a good friend that was moving to France, and we made plans that after graduation we would hitchhike around Europe. She moved to Grenoble in France with her sister when I was a senior. So really the only thing that got me through high school was traveling, knowing that this trip was in the offing and planning for it. Otherwise, I think I would have gone kind of nuts. So summer of the year I graduated high school was the first time I went out and about. I actually left Washington, D.C. 3 days before graduation. The airfares were going up, and I saved, I think, $50 by leaving before I could march across the stage. My parents were furious. My principal was furious. But I was ready to go. I'd been chomping at the bit for a long time, so I took a bus up to New York and got on a plane, and over to Europe I went, backpack on my back and thumb ready to stick out in the road.
So what were those first destinations then on your first trip?
Well, this was kind of the harbinger of how things were to be. I flew Icelandic Air, which I was supposed to fly Icelandic Air, which at the time was the cheapest fare you could get.
It's still kind of around that.
Still very economical.
Area.
But when I got to JFK in New York, they put me on Air Pakistan.
Okay.
And I had people waiting for me in Europe to pick me up, but I'd been rerouted to Paris. So it was kind of the first lesson in be flexible. Your plans are always going to change, and you got to learn to roll with the punches.
That's a wonderful lesson. We experienced that quite a bit when we got to and involving Paris as well. When we were just in France this summer, the NS or the NCSF or something of this nature, the train company that runs all throughout France was on strike. So about 1/3 of the normal services were actually going live. So we couldn't find a train from France to our next destination, which was Marseille. So we had to ask people that we didn't really know, like, how do we get out of here? Because another thing was happening was the Seine had flooded horribly. So, there was a lot of roads that were underwater and subway lines that were underwater. So what we did is we hired a BlaBlaCar, which is like a ride-sharing service in Europe. So flexibility is important, but it was fun. We had a nice 8-hour drive to Marseille, and the driver was very kind. So what were some other places that you visited on that trip?
Well, that first trip of mine, I went from Paris to Spain, over to Greece, and then to Israel, where I worked on a kibbutz. I hitchhiked during pretty much the whole trip. I did take trains from time to time, but I traveled very slowly. I love to stay in small villages and meet the people. I was not so much enamored of the big cities. I met a lot of people that were doing the Eurail Pass, which is an absolutely wonderful way to see the countryside. But I just kind of chosen a slower pace for myself. And I got as far as Israel. I had met some kids in Greece where I had traveled to Lesbos, and they said, "Hey, come on, we're going to go hang out on kibbutz for a while." And I'd been backpacking it for about 6 months, so I was ready to kind of cool my jets and unpack my pack and stay in one place for a while. So although I had planned to go to Istanbul from Greece, I thought, yeah, I'll go hang out in Israel and see what it's like. Fascinating place, right? So that's where I ended that particular trip.
And what this word you said in Israel, this what was the word you said? You stayed on boats? What was this word?
Kibbutz.
Kibbutz. And
yes.
Is that a location? What is that?
A kibbutz is a collective. It's like a commune.
Oh, okay.
Right. The Israelis, basically, they have to maximize their resources. So they have built these rural communes throughout the country. And they are not completely pure, but they're pretty close. They keep all of the kids in one location. And they have a certain number of women that teach the kids, take care of them, so that the women can work. They also have a communal dining facility so that, once again, people's time is not taken up with cooking 3 meals a day. The dining hall takes care of it, and they work their tushes off. Israel is all about productivity, and a kibbutz helps them maximize that. And it was just an absolutely fascinating experience. They have all sorts of different industries on a kibbutz, everything from chicken farming to fishing the Sea of Galilee, cotton farming, orange groves.
Okay, whoa. So is this like, was this like a government plan, or did this just come about due to people and ingenuity?
That's a good question. I don't know how these were instigated, and I don't know what role the government plays in them, but they're still going strong today. And it's a lifestyle choice for people. And it's a big commitment to them. Again, you have kids, and then at a certain age, they go off to live in the children's house. Mm-hmm. You see them on the weekends, that sort of thing. But
wow.
And of course, you eat meals with them, and you can spend the evenings with them. But this is all to maximize the labor force.
Okay. So, we're talking electricity, plumbing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Totally modern. We actually had a hotel on the kibbutz,
Oh,
too.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And this focus on productivity, was this reflected in their personalities? Was there a lot of creative tendencies, or was it more just working class?
I think that Israelis are very serious because they have a lot of serious issues that they deal with. Mm-hmm. I happened to be there at the time that the Camp David Accord was signed, and I'm seriously dating myself. This was 1978. And we used to see jets fly over the Golan Heights,
wow.
fighter jets. It was kind of intense. And they would have a bombing a day in Haifa, Jerusalem, and Tel Aviv. And you would see public service announcements on TV saying if you see a package or a briefcase sitting
mm-hmm.
unattended, report it, that sort of thing. Stuff we're dealing with now, they were dealing with every day 30 years ago.
And what year did you say this was?
This was 1978.
Okay, good bit.
Yeah,
good
it's an intense country to be sure, but...
and how long were you there for?
I think I was there for maybe about 2 months. I had planned to stay a little bit longer, not too much, and then your grandfather had a stroke, so I came home.
Okay. So all told, your first trip was 8 months.
Right.
First trip backpacking as a young person across Europe. Well, you got me beat by about 5.5 months, so bully for you. What did that do? The way I described it was when I came back from Europe, and I did the Eurail, which Mary's right, it's a lovely way to travel the country, if only for the reason that the amount of concerns that are removed from your shoulders by having that ticket is so great. There's this whole genre of concerns that just go away immediately, and that's how do I get from A to B? Because we just go to the train station and be like, oh, here we are, and they'd say, yeah, go on. sometimes they wouldn't say anything. They just, there were a lot of times where our passes were never even checked. And this is not, of course, encouraging young people to hitch trains that they're not supposed to be on. But the way I described it was, when I came back, it felt that the volume knob on the rest of life had been turned down. Because when you see this much, when you experience this much humanity, this much culture, geography in such a brief span of time, it kind of leaves you breathless. And 2 weeks after I returned, I was thinking, where do I want to go next? Did you experience that at all?
Absolutely. As soon as I got back, and as I said, this first trip was supposed to be an around the world for me, and it was cut short by my father's death. But you and I had different agendas. You had time constraints. I did not, and that's why I chose to hitchhike. And for you, the Euro pass made much more sense. But the slower pace I was going at definitely brought about that same feeling that you were talking about. It's basically culture shock. And I don't even know that shock is the correct word to describe it, but it gives you a cultural awareness. I mean, we've both grown up in the Washington suburbs, and it's not as homogenous as it used to be, but it's not something that exposes you to is much of the world as some of us, you and I in particular, would like. If anything, it just kind of wets our whistles for more. I can remember when I first got to Europe and struck out on my own, going to the ancient city of Lyon in France, and I met up with a Belgian lad who was basically touring cathedrals around Europe.
Okay.
And I thought this was fascinating myself, that here's a guy in his early 20s that has a fascination with cathedrals, until you go into them and see the magnificence in these structures. And I can remember going into one cathedral, and I was just awestruck by it. And he says, "Oh, this is nothing. This is only 400 years old." And that's when you realize what a young country we are. When you see these beautiful structures that are just hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years old. In Lyon, they had Roman ruins. They had colosseums.
Wow.
Small, actually amphitheaters, so take that back, not colosseums.
Yes.
And to see things like that was such an eye-opener and such a thrill. And I don't think you ever get over that.
I agree. I just wanted to touch on the thing you said about culture shock. I think, and you build a cultural awareness. What I noticed was how it was as much of a shock as it was a slow build. And at about it was like we were like 2 months in, maybe, on my trip, and we were walking through Brussels Central Station in Belgium, and I heard two American women speaking very loudly as they walked by. And I have nothing against my own culture, countrymen. I don't buy the annoying American traveler stereotype, because the fact that they are traveling means that they are an exceptional individual. But I remember hearing this and thinking, I looked at my sister and I'm like, who am I? It just they felt, and the idea of America felt at that moment just as foreign as walking through Brussels did. And it was an interesting thing that kind of crept up on me. And that, the first, we started in Ireland, which wasn't a huge shock because it's, they speak English. The small towns of rural Ireland can be reflected in certain small American towns as well. They have the same kind of values. But when you get to mainland, and when we started going through France, it was really hitting me. And the fact that there is a cathedral in basically every major city, it was always so lovely, because I knew that no matter where we went, there was something to do, which was at least just go visit the cathedral. But one of the ones we went to in Nantes, which was the Cathedral of St. Peter and St. Paul, I think it was so huge and so magnificent. It was probably my favorite, trumping even St. Peter's. I went to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. But the thing about the Nantes building was it felt that it was built by gods for gods as opposed to by man for gods. And I thought that was an interesting, and they all had different character as you went along. But for me, it was sort of as slow as it was fast, the culture immersion.
Well, it says a lot, too, about the pace of life back at the time that they built these. I know as an American, I found myself saying, man, can you imagine how long it took to build these?
Yeah.
And that's because as an American, I think of things in terms of time and profitability. Back then, they didn't. They basically had all the time in the world, and their goal was magnificence. It wasn't getting this done quickly, and just getting it finished. They were in search of perfection, and they didn't care how long it took. And it shows. And I think you and I talking about cathedrals, a lot of people may be yawning because until you actually walk into these cathedrals, you just can't appreciate the feeling that you get when you walk into these magnificent edifices. They are really a testament to what man can do.
Yes.
And
when I walked into the Nantes Cathedral, I looked around, and for the first time in my life, in regards to the Christian faith, I said, "Okay, I get it.
Yeah,
I get it."
Yeah.
There was another one we went to in Marseille, the Notre Dame de la Garde, the Our Lady of the Guard, was 1,200 years old, and of course, different parts of it had fallen apart and been rebuilt, but the original structure itself, built on a hill overlooking the port area of Marseille, was 1,200 years old. And it had this beautiful gold and maroon checkerboard pattern on the walls and the arches. And McKinley and I walked in, and I thought to myself, this feels like a cathedral built for a grandmother, because you kind of almost felt like you had to keep your elbows tucked in for fear of like knocking a knickknack off of a shelf. But it was so gorgeous, and that was my sister's favorite cathedral of the trip. And what we saw this site, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention it, which was these two Eastern European pilgrims, legitimate pilgrims. And they walked in through the door, and they stood there with genuine awe in their faces, and McKinley and I went and toured the entire building, and on our way out, they were still standing there. They were just overwhelmed by the splendor of it all. So
absolutely. Good word. Good description.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more about until you've gone into them. There's some grand religious structures in this country, but imagine a world where everybody was a Christian. So everything you did was the idea of built, for the glory of God. So all of the European heritages have some connection to that world, and I think that's why you get such unique splendor of all of these different buildings. The Florence Cathedral I saw, unfortunately I didn't get to go in, but that one was amazing due to its color and its size, and you learn about that one taking like 400 years to build because they built everything, and then it took like just 200 years to finish the dome because nobody could figure out how to get the dome right.
Yep. They also had the best and the brightest in the land working on these projects. Again, it goes back to the difference between how we work now and how they worked back then. I mean, they sought to achieve perfection. They sought to make it the absolute best. Spare no expense. And I'm sure they thought about expenses and whatnot, but they were always trying to outdo the other guy too and make it more magnificent, to make it grander than somebody else's. And it shows. And let's not forget too, it's a great place to go to get in and out of the rain.
Yeah, yes. This has nothing to do with travel, but I really like what you said about the pace of those times. I, like many young people in this country, went to the store Tivana, and I bought a cast iron teapot, and I love that thing because it slows down an activity that I value, and just kind of breezed by before. You know, I'd make a pot of tea, and it was scalding hot until it wasn't scalding hot, and then it was about a good drinking temperature for about 6 minutes, and then it was too cold. And you make 40 ounces of it, and you'd maybe drink 12, and then it was too cold, and you'd have to either microwave it. But this just keeps the heat in, and they're handmade, and it just takes an activity that I enjoy, which is drinking tea, and slows it down. And I think there's something to be said for that. In whatever you do, is to slow things. If you really appreciate something, try to slow the process down, and you might discover things about it that you like and weren't aware of. But just moving on, you kind of answered this a little bit, but what did travel represent for you back in those days in high school? Just to give you an example, was for me, the traveling that I did this summer was, what it represented for me was an adventure, a chance to experience all shades of the human condition. And I wanted the difficulties just as much as I wanted the grander moments, like looking at cathedrals and stuff. But the troubles, and like when my sister had her phone stolen in Paris, when we were on trains for 16 hours, kind of riding aimlessly into this Italian city, and none of us spoke the language, and they didn't really speak English. Like, those hardships for me were just as memorable, and I think about them just as much, and in a positive way, as I do about all of the wonderful things that happened. So what did it represent for you back then?
Well, I think you kind of hit on it. Anybody that goes on an extended journey, something that isn't just a 2-week vacation, is looking forward to the self-exploration that comes along with it. They recognize the fact that it's going to be a challenge and that they're going to be tested. And I think for me, especially being 18, I mean fresh out of high school, I was very excited to kind of test my own mettle. I had, as I mentioned, grown up in a pretty conservative area, and I was looking forward to striking out on my own and seeing how I did. And especially in an area where I knew I would be challenged. You have the language barriers, and not just having to learn one language, staying in one country, but traveling from place to place and having to learn different languages, having to communicate with people, having to adapt to different cultures, and seeing whether or not I just freaked out and had a total meltdown or whether or not I could adapt. And the adventure, as you said, I mean, I think especially as young people, I've always thought that it's a huge disappointment that we take human beings at a time when they're most physically active and sit them down in classrooms for 8 hours a day. I was so ready to just get out and flail around the world and explore and meet new people and see new things. I was tired of the same old thing day in and day out. I just wanted to get out there and see what there was to be seen, because I knew there was a heck of a lot more going on than what was happening in Vienna, Virginia.
Mm-hmm. So now I know that a lot of your travel was done after this period involving boats and the water. 2 questions. Did anything occur between those periods when you came back from Israel and when you got your interest in going on boats and traveling via the water? Did anything happen there? And then if not, move on. How did the water aspect, the aquatic aspect, come about?
Well, as I said, my first trip was cut short when my dad died, and I came back and I actually got a job repossessing cars. I did that for a couple of years on and off, but I stayed back here and collected some more money, and then still intended to go around the world, but this time I went at it from the other direction. I met up with a girlfriend of mine who I had met on kibbutz, and we left Portland, Oregon, and flew to Australia. And I spent 6 months in Australia, which is the length of the visa that they'll give you.
Okay.
and kind of ran out of money. Unfortunately, I had intended to go further on, but had kind of overspent myself in Australia. It's a big party country.
Yeah, dude, some of the most insane people I meet at hostels are always the Aussies.
I'm telling you, they're wonderful. They're just wonderful people. But while I was there, I was up north in Queensland in the city of Cairns, and one day I was walking back to my hotel, and I thought, well, just go down by the waterfront and look at the boats. And as I was walking down the wharf, this guy said, "Hey, you want a job?"
Wow.
And what happens with the shrimp boats is a lot of times the crew members get their pay and then they take off for a while and you don't see them. So this guy was looking for crew. And here I am, 19, blonde, American. And, Andy, my feeling is that when these opportunities present themselves, a lot of times you just got to dive in head first. So I said, yeah. So that's really where my passion for boats started. I got a job on a shrimp boat, and we went between Cairns and Queensland and Thursday Island, which was like the Wild Wild West. I mean, it was crazy, crazy place. And I spent 3 months working on a shrimp boat. And that's when I really decided this is what I want to do. I want to make money being at sea, because this is the bomb. And as I said, my initial plan had been to go on from Australia to Indonesia and overland to Asia.
Okay.
But financially it didn't pan out, so I came back to the States and hitchhiked back to D.C. And then I thought, well, I'll go back to school for a while. And I got a scholarship and was going to do that. But instead, I fell in love and ended up being an entrepreneur for 11 years. And this was a point in my life when I actually tried the American dream.
Okay.
Okay, I had a house at 23, had a 62 Corvette, had a sailboat, motorcycle.
That makes me feel a bit lazy.
3 weeks vacations in the Caribbean, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
But, I was never gruntled, as they say. Successful business, nice husband, stepkids, step-grandkids. But when that marriage fell apart, I said, all right, now we got to get back on the stick and do the boat thing. So I moved on to a houseboat on the Potomac River, got a job at a marina, and used to commute to work up the Potomac on my little speedboat.
Wow.
And I set to work putting a dream back together, which was making my living on the water. So one day I saw an ad for a boat looking for crew to spend the winter in the Caribbean. And I answered that ad, and that was the start of my yachting career. But as so many things are, it wasn't really what it was cut out to be. And my boyfriend at the time, who decided he wanted to go with me, he and I jumped ship in Florida, and we had sold all our stuff, quit our jobs, and taken off, and now we didn't know what we were going to do, because this boat was just a scow. It was not what it was described as being. But we went out down to Fort Lauderdale and ended up scoring jobs on mega yachts, and that's
mega yachts?
We didn't even know it was a thing, Andy.
Well, we are alike in that regard.
Yep.
Is that just a big yacht?
Mega yachts are the big white Clorox bottles that rich people tool around in. They're like floating condos.
Okay.
You wear your white uniforms and basically, like I said, they're like floating condos.
Yeah.
They're from 1 to 300 feet long, self-contained, generators. And basically what we did is we spent 5 years working on those and eventually got our captain's licenses, upgraded our captain's licenses, sailed across the Pacific, sailed all through the Caribbean and the Bahamas.
Oh, you can't just say sailed across the Pacific.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you go from where, Florida?
We left Fort Lauderdale, sailed through the Gulf of Mexico.
Through the Panama Canal?
Through the Panama Canal. Sailed to French Polynesia, landed in the Marquesas, then basically sailed down to New Zealand, and then we jumped ship there and we bought a camper van and spent 6 months driving around New Zealand in the camper van.
Okay, so that's a whole career of travel in itself. If somebody said, I did all of this and I felt that I've done all the traveling that I need to do, I'd say, good on you, mate. But is there anything, that's obviously a large span of time, so are there any experiences, anything you remember that you wanted to point out about a journey from Fort Lauderdale to French Polynesia to New Zealand?
Spending 28 days at sea, Andy, was definitely one of the high points of my life. It was magnificent. The rhythms of not seeing land, just being at sea day after day, sun up, sun down. It's hard to describe. It sounds boring, perhaps, but it's just delightful. And perhaps maybe before I pass on, I'll be able to do it again because I truly, truly enjoyed it. It's not for everybody. Kind of like where I live now on an island. You have to be very comfortable in your own skin. You have to be able to amuse yourself. But I just thought it was a wonderful way to spend a month, just being in the beautiful Pacific Ocean.
So I think for me, probably what would bother me the most about that is the inability to like run around.
Yes, that would be tough for you, Andy.
Did you ever what's the remedy for that? Is it just mental control or?
Yes. And I think some of these things, Andy, came along at the right point for the right age for me. I was in my 20s when I was in Australia. I was in my 30s when I worked on yachts.
Okay.
I started building my house in the Bahamas in my 40s. If I had done these things at a different time in my life, I may not have found them as suitable for my temperament.
Okay.
You have to kind of go with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's just recap for a moment. You got your captain's license at Fort Lauderdale. You go through the Gulf of Mexico, then across the Pacific Ocean. You said French Polynesia. Oh,
man, French, I can't recommend the Marquesas enough. They are just stunning. Except for the black flies. They bite you and leave a welt.
Oh, dear.
But the people there, I think that's another thing that we haven't really touched on yet, Andy. The people that you meet when you're traveling, they just open their hearts. There's something about when you meet somebody that's on the road that brings out the best in people. They just become their most hospitable and their most open. It's just, it's amazing the way you can become fast friends with somebody when you meet them on the road, the way that you never would in a city. It can take ages to develop a friendship in the city, but when you meet somebody on the road, it can seem like you've known each other for decades.
That's very interesting. I kind of think, because some of the people I met in my trip across Europe were some phenomenal souls, and one of them, Ron from Ireland, I met on the ferry boat from Rosslare to Cherbourg in France. Ron, he did the intro music for this the intro speech for this podcast. He has a lovely sort of BBC voice, but he's from County Cork. But he is just one of a myriad of very, very extraordinary human beings that I met on my trip in hostels, through couch surfing. But I think one of the reasons why that is because it guarantees, the international traveling community is a lot like online dating in the way that you both meet each other knowing that you hold more or less the same values close to your heart.
Well, I would agree. I think when you meet other travelers, you're kindred spirits, but I'm also talking about the kind of people that you meet in towns.
Okay.
They open up their hearts and their homes to travelers. I met one Greek woman on a ferry to Lesbos, and she was, in her 80s maybe. I shared a little doorway with her on the ferry. Mm-hmm. And then I waited with her until her daughter and son-in-law came to pick her up so I could help her with her luggage. And she didn't speak a word of English, but we conversed in the way that people that don't speak the same language do.
Yeah.
Oh, they ended up taking me home and taking me around to the neighbors and feeding me and giving me gifts and
Wow.
for a tiny, tiny act of kindness. And I think people just have a soft spot in their heart for travelers. And so not just fellow travelers, but the folks you meet in town just always seem to be especially kind to folks that are on the road.
Now, yeah, I experienced something similar to that, and I
It
almost
may be jealousy. You never know.
I feel, well, maybe not jealousy, but like reverence is a very strong word,
Could
but like
be. Yeah,
like
yeah.
like
a little bit
a
of respect.
respect.
Yeah.
There you go.
Sure.
Like
They want to do it, but they just can't quite, for one reason or another, pull it off.
Yeah, that's a good observation. So the people in French Polynesia were wonderful.
Yeah, just again, a lot of times when you go to third world countries, it's just mind blowing that the folks that seem to have the least offer the most.
That's what I hear from literally everybody. There's two halves to that coin. The half that say, I've been there, they're the nicest humans on the face of the earth. And then the other half of the coin says, don't go there, it's too dangerous. So
no, you know, it's funny. Panama was a place with a relatively high crime rate that we got warned about. And we traveled all through Panama City and Cologne. And we actually had at one point woman come up to us waving her finger saying, you know, Pellegriso, you know, and literally put us in a taxi and told us to get out of this part of town. But when it came down to it, the only thing we ever had stolen was some life vests. We had a little sailboat on top of our camper van in New Zealand, and we had some life vests shoved up there. And somebody nicked them. And I thought, boy, you want to talk about bad karma? Who would wear stolen life vests?
There's something weird about a stolen life vest.
Yeah, not smart.
Okay, so you're in New Zealand. You've got a camper van. You're there for 6 months. Did you do both the North and the South Island?
We did. We went all the way from the tippy top of the North to the bottom of the South. When we got to the South, it was our intention to get tattoos of Alfred E. Newman on our butt.
Okay.
Because we figured as we got older and our butts sagged, it would still make us laugh. I mean, who doesn't love Alfred E. Newman, right?
Yeah.
You know, Mad Magazine.
For sure. Yeah.
But then we realized we needed our butts to sit on, and we didn't like the Invercargill, the city in the South, so we didn't do it.
Okay.
But
I hear that there's a place. New Zealand is one of the really popular travel destinations now for modern teens for a couple of reasons. One, they're very welcoming. The whole Lord of the Rings tour there is obviously big. I would absolutely love to go there. They're very welcoming of foreigners for longer stays as well, in terms of work visas, school visas, things of this nature. So I hear a lot of people talk about how wonderful New Zealand is. Did you happen to go by? I know that there's a certain natural, I think it's the South Island, which is the volcanic one, maybe?
yes.
But there's a climate that is volcanic in nature.
Yes.
Did you get into that area at all?
We did. We climbed volcanoes. We took helicopter rides around glaciers. We went to fjords. I think one of the things that's most attractive about New Zealand is that the diversity of the landscape. I mean, you can just you can't name a type of terrain that you can't find there. When we left Fort Lauderdale, our original destination was Australia.
Okay.
And we ended up in New Zealand. Bad navigating. But I told my husband at the time, I said, it's basically like taking all of the best bits of Australia, which are around the coast, and then condensing them into a smaller place and getting rid of all the desert in the middle.
There you go. Okay.
But I can't recommend Australia enough either. You want to talk about welcoming people. They're wonderful.
I've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
So I guess
But they will party you into the ground.
Oh my God. It wasn't I was in Los Angeles. I was staying at a hostel there. When I was 19, I moved to Los Angeles, and there was the room next to me was filled with Australians, and they got up to all kinds of late night extravagant substance abuses.
They're intense.
They are intense people, dude, for sure.
Lovely folk.
I'd love to go there as well. That's a harsh plane ride, though, for a guy with long legs like me.
It is.
So New Zealand for 6 months. I guess the only question I can ask now is, like, what next? Because you seem to be on a roll here.
Well, when I was in Australia, I rode a motorcycle for the first time. I met a young man that had a motorcycle, and he said, "Do you know how to ride?" And I said, "Well, yeah." Now, he didn't ask me if I'd ever ridden before. I just knew the mechanics of it. And I'd ridden on the back plenty of times. And so I started tooling around this paddock, basically a field, and was having a blast and going faster and faster and faster. And then finally I hit a root and did a Superman through the air and landed on my elbows and my knees and lost a big mess of skin, which was a big disappointment for me because I had a job on an oyster lease where you're wading around in salt water, and I was supposed to start the next day.
Oh.
with ripped up joints, that wasn't going to happen. But like so many things in life, you have no idea what today will bring and what you do that day, how it's going to affect the rest of your life. But same thing, fell in love with motorcycles. And so right now, that's kind of my passion. I've got 3 bikes. I've got one in Texas, one in Virginia, and one in the Bahamas. And my bike in Texas is what's called a dual sport bike. You can ride it on the street or you can ride it on the dirt. So right now my next adventure is set for next summer when my pal who lives in Houston and I intend to ride what's called the Trans-America Trail or the TAT. It's dirt roads that extend from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And so we're going to ride dirt bikes across the country.
Okay, by way of America?
You bet.
Oh, my gosh.
You bet. And we're going to call it...
with dirt bikes.
You got it. We're going to call it 4 Tits for the Tat.
So, moving on. That sounds excellent.
Yeah. Well, there's another trip we were thinking about taking this winter. I don't know if it's going to happen. We've been trying to get our bikes over to Cuba. I went to Cuba in 2007.
How did you manage that?
Well, Andy, the rest of the world goes to Cuba.
Oh, okay.
There are daily flights to Cuba from Nassau, where I've lived for 18 years.
Okay, sure.
So I went with my ex-husband and his parents. I mean, it's that safe. It's that easy to travel around. And we got a deal called a fly and ride, where basically when you land, they give you a rental car and hotel vouchers for 7 days and a map showing you where their hotels are, and they say bye-bye, and you just travel around and stay in whatever hotels you like. And you want to talk about welcoming. They love Americans.
Really?
Oh, my goodness. I don't think I've ever gotten a better reception anywhere in the world than Cuba.
I think that it would be fair to say that that's surprising for somebody who hasn't experienced that.
Looking forward to going back. May make it this winter. I do have a neighbor that says he's going to take his boat over there, a neighbor in the Bahamas.
What's the appeal of bringing your bike there?
Great roads.
Okay.
Motorcycle trip, dirt bike trip. As I said, I'm, kind of become I've had motorcycles for a long time. I had my first motorcycle when I was 21, but I'm just kind of getting back into it now. And it would be a great place to explore on a motorcycle. Lots of super great dirt roads there.
And how old are you?
56.
Phew. Story of success, if I ever have heard one.
Well, I think you should do South America on a motorcycle.
Well,
That's my vote for you. Now, I've been to Brazil. I went to Rio for Carnival and spent some time in the Amazon, and I'm telling you, that's another place that just screams dirt bike.
Okay, well, I'm definitely doing South America, but I'm not doing it by dirt bike.
I'm going to work on you.
Maybe one for the future. I wanted to ask, on this journey from Lauderdale, you've mentioned reference to a companion. How important was that companion, having that person in making these plans? Do you think you still would have done them without this individual?
Absolutely. My very first trip, when I went backpacking across Europe, I was supposed to go with a girlfriend at the time, and she backed out at the last minute, and I went ahead with the trip. That was my 8-month backpacking trip. The second trip to Australia, I went with a girlfriend I'd met on kibbutz, and we split up after a month.
Okay.
We didn't travel well together.
Yeah.
Now, my second husband and I, we were together for 20 years, and we had a lot of amazing adventures together. There's no doubt about that. But I was heading off on that trip with or without him.
Okay.
We had just met when I was making my plans to leave D.C. and go work on boats. So there are basically two schools of thought about traveling solo or going with somebody else. And it all depends on what you're comfortable with. I think when you go by yourself, you meet more people. If you go with someone that you know, it can be a little bit more comfortable and a little less lonely. But I think either is fine.
I think both are necessary because I think what I've noticed is traveling brings up a lot of different questions, like where would I want to go? What would I want to do?
Sure.
Like all of these different things. And I think traveling is something that you almost need to learn what your own travel personality, almost like, are you the kind of person who likes everything to be very organized, on time, your ins and your outs are very clear? Or are you somebody more like yourself who is more loose in your ways? What excites you about the country you're visiting? Are you going to spend your whole day in museums? Are you going to walk around town and meet locals? Or are you doing eco-travel? Do you travel well with others? Can you be around one person for 2.5 months without feeling that you need space? My experience with my sister traveling through Europe was very good because I thought we both complemented each other very well, because I knew that there would be many beautiful things that I would find on different travel guides, Wikipedia, places of history that she wouldn't want to go just because she wouldn't have the initiative to go and look those things up. That's how we found the Notre Dame de la Garde, if you excuse my French, but that was her favorite thing, and she never would have done that. We took a bus ride up the windiest, narrowest streets, and this is a big bus, but it was old and clanking, and it's trying to drag it and 40 other people up the side of this mountain to get to this cathedral, and she probably would not have mapped the bus route out, learned about the cathedral in the first place without me. We went to a town in northern Italy called Lucca, which has these walls. It's a walled city. And it was she loved it, one of her favorite experiences. I picked out the restaurants, the museums. She didn't want to go in the museum that I picked out. It ended up being one of her favorite museums. So I knew that she would be able to acquire that. And on the flip side, she is a social butterfly, and I knew that she would help me get into situations where I'd be able to meet and talk with people that I would not have the wherewithal to do myself. She handled the couch surfing and a lot of the accommodations really well. So we complemented each other very, very well in that regard.
Well, pat yourself on the back, because it takes a tremendous amount of flexibility, and you have to be open-minded. And those two characteristics, I think, are essential to really enjoying long-term travel. But a lot of people are not cut out for it. And as I said, my girlfriend that I traveled to Australia with, we found after a month, we just did not have compatible travel styles. But we'd known each other for quite some time on kibbutz. But traveling, didn't work. Didn't have the same styles. We didn't even walk at the same pace. We just couldn't agree on much, and we parted ways. And oddly enough, we ran into each other flying back to the States.
Wow.
What are the chances? So we babbled for the whatever 15-hour flight on the way home and compared notes. But it's not easy. I mean, there are couples that can't take a 2-week vacation together. So I think if you're planning to go someplace on a long-term trip with someone, definitely do a trial run someplace short.
Yes. Take a weekend to go somewhere in America, something of this nature.
They may have some personal habits that just drive you crazy. I just went on a 1,200-mile motorcycle trip with my girlfriend, found out she snores.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, not too bad, though. Not too bad. She's the one I'm going to go cross-country with. I think I can deal with it. And if it becomes a problem, I'll wear earplugs.
Are you planning to stay in hotels and stuff? Are you going to do some camping, or how's
Both.
that?
Yeah, we'll do a little camping, and every now and then when we need a hot shower and a mattress, we'll get a hotel.
Brilliant. I'm planning to do the same thing across South America, a mixture of both.
I hear the hotels are very economical in South America.
That's what it looks like, too. And I'm very fortunate that I'm doing 3 countries, Ecuador, Peru, Chile. I'm not going to make it down to Argentina because Chile is so long. Mm-hmm. There's so many bus rides.
I've got to put you in touch with an Aussie friend that used to live in Peru. She'll be able to.
Do it. By the way, what just happened is your bread and butter when you become a traveler is to accept the hookups from other travelers.
Sure.
Because they're almost so often they're right on the ball. But I'm going to do a little camping and a little hotel trips as well. Specifically because on this trip I want to do some eco travel. I've never really done that before, but it was visiting you in the Bahamas and just being in the jungle for the first time. And I've spoken about the jungle on this podcast before and how I feel everybody at some point in their life should walk through the jungle because it's kind of like the inevitable conclusion of carbon-based life forms. Like it's the highest order. It's the biggest. Everything is the most connected. And walking around, you tune into frequencies that you don't get in boreal forests or most other environments. But after experiencing that, I thought, you know what? I want to travel. I want to see some of this splendor of nature as opposed to Europe, where it was the splendor of man in a sort of flip-floppy way. So I also know that you have had a stint managing private islands. I mentioned that in the intro. How does that manifest itself? Judging on all the other opportunities you've had, it's probably going to be quite spontaneous.
Very much so. When we were working on yachts, one of the crewing agencies said, look, we've got a guy that has a private island. And it's kind of similar to yachts. It has water desalination equipment and generators, and you've got to buy provisions for months in advance, and it's kind of remote. You don't see a lot of people. There isn't a lot of social life, so it's a similar lifestyle. Are you interested? And we said, well, if we get a free trip to the Bahamas out of it to talk to the guy, why not? And, the way we looked at it, it was a long shot, but lo and behold, he hired us, and that led to 12 years running private islands.
12 years?
Yeah.
And was this something that was full-time, or did you only
Oh, absolutely. It's a lifestyle. It's 7 days a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how many individuals' islands did you manage?
Well, we worked for Canadian gentlemen. We worked for Johnny Depp. We worked for Tyler Perry.
What? Johnny Depp?
Yeah, we did. We managed his island for 4 years. I guess those 3. No, I take that back. We managed Holland America's cruise ship line for a brief period. We were actually on that island when 9/11 happened and thought we might be pulling the entire family over to the islands if things got crazy.
Well, I wouldn't have minded that. That's for certain.
Yeah.
So, did you get to meet Johnny Depp?
Got kissed by Johnny Depp.
Oh. So
danced around with Johnny Depp's underwear on my head one time just for grins, just so I could say I did.
I knew you'd be a great guest. What's he like?
He's a character. What can I say?
I imagine.
He is an individual unlike any other, but he's a gentleman, but he has his quirks.
How long did you manage his island for?
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I'm not sure I know what else to say about that. That's a world that is fairly unique.
It is indeed, and I think people that live in that stratosphere. Again, I worked on yachts for 5 years and managed islands for the rich and famous for 12 years. It's something that we think about and wonder about, but when it comes right down to it, they're just people. Their lifestyles are a little bit different, but they've got the same problems and the same woes and the same worries that we do, or maybe slightly different worries. But
so how remote are some of these islands?
Very remote. If we wanted to get to the nearest settlement to buy anything, it was a 45-minute boat ride. And in the wintertime, when the weather got nasty, that could be pretty intense. Okay,
and would this be in the Caribbean or?
No, the Bahamas are in the Atlantic. They are not in the Caribbean. The Caribbean is further south.
And so the islands were in the Bahamas?
Yes.
Okay. Well, besides just diving into every question about Johnny Depp, moving on from that, I wanted to talk, now you've mentioned several times, and I said at the top of the broadcast that you built a house for yourself and you live in the Bahamas on Long Island. I had the wonderful pleasure of being able to visit you and stay in your house there. The first thing that I noticed was boarding the plane and seeing on the inside duct tape covering much of the fuselage, and the pilot doing the pre-flight announcements, we'll be cruising at an altitude of about this for a time of this, just screaming at us over the sound of the ruddered engines.
Yeah.
And that there was a small curtain covering the cockpit, and as we were landing on Long Island, the curtain fell open, and I was able to look out through the windscreen and see that we were basically landing in what, if you had blindfolded me and I didn't know where I was going, and I opened my eyes, I was like, have I just landed in the Congo? Am I about to land in Botswana? Like, this was a small jungle airstrip, and we flew past about half of it before we touched down, and I was seriously worried that we were going to run out of tarmac.
It's intense, and I spent many years flying in small planes and seaplanes, being in the islands, and it takes some time to get used to. There's no doubt about that. It definitely has a pucker factor. But it's something that you put up with and you get used to like anything else, and it just becomes a way of life.
So I have a couple of questions on this. First, why the Bahamas?
Again, it just happened. A big part of my life has been opportunities that come up that we just said, can't think of a good reason why not. We had been looking for another yacht, but we got an island instead, and it was in the Bahamas, and we just kind of made a career there. And then after we had worked for Johnny for 4 years, we decided to take a sabbatical and build a house on some property that we had bought. We like the Bahamas. It's a great place. It's close to the States. It's English speaking, stable government, good economy. And we decided that it would be a good place to retire. And we thought, what a unique challenge building the house ourselves. We had someone else do the foundation, and then we built a 2-story, 1,600 square foot house on our own. Actually, I split with my ex about halfway through and finished it myself.
So, had you ever done intense carpentry before?
No, we'd done some minor stuff and some minor electrical and minor plumbing. I mean, that's part of managing islands. There's renovation work and maintenance and things like that. But having seen people build before in the Bahamas, we figured we can do that. If they can do it, we can do it. And, Andy, the bottom line is, it used to be in the olden days, you got married, your parents gave you a piece of land, you got your friends together, you built a house. It's not rocket science.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose. Okay, another question.
No, seriously, we've gotten to the point of specialization
Yeah.
in our society where we perform one specific job. You know, farmers used to do it all,
Yeah.
but now we're very specialized, and we perform one specific job, and we think everybody else's job is voodoo. You know? It's just magic,
Okay.
and we can't do it. And that's just not true. There are so many things that we are capable of doing if we just get over the fear factor and give it a shot.
I think my only connection with that is probably in artistic pursuits. I recently submitted a fantasy novel, sort of sword and sorcery, to a reviewing platform, and they came back with grammatical corrections and 2 big thumbs up. And they said, well, you might consider defining the changes of time and scene better. But they really liked it.
Fantastic.
So I think that for me as a creative, more artistically minded person, going from music to writing songs to writing books, or let's call them stories, because none of them have been put into book form yet, but that seemed like a natural progression to me. And now I'm beginning to consider, well, after going through Europe, I thought, it seems that visual art is a very important, creative output. So I went and I got some painting and sketching supplies, and I have no illusions that I'm going to be some kind of make a living or even partial of a living selling art.
Never know.
Of course. But for me, the progression of creative pursuits from music, which was the first thing, into writing material, and now to drawing, it just seems natural to me.
You know, one of my favorite characters in life is Grandma Moses. She didn't start painting till her 60s, and she became a world-renowned painter. I think we all possess hidden talents that we just don't tap, and this is something that we talked about a little the other day. The thing that holds us back is fear. And we all have to get over that. And talking about travel and adventures and different things, that's the key to it, is getting over the fear factor. And I mentioned a quote to you that you said that you'd like me to bring up, and that's something that I saw when I was getting my captain's license. We had to take a course in firefighting.
Okay.
And at the firefighting facility, up over one of the archways, it said, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It's moving forward in the face of it." And I think
beautiful.
Anytime that we're faced with something new, we get some trepidation. I know for me, fear is something that's at the foot of my bed every morning. It's my decision to kick it off and go and spend my day living in faith or give in. And it's a daily struggle.
There must have been fears trying to build a house in a country that I suppose you were pretty familiar with the country.
Every time I do something new, though, I have, this trip next summer on the Tat, I keep thinking, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. But that is, and I tell myself, that's just how you feel at the beginning of an adventure. You think you have these, what am I doing moments, but they pass and you move on.
Right. The fear, not that I had a huge amount of fears going through Europe, but the fears that I felt in the few bad situations that occurred, I knew that while they were happening, this is a valuable experience that in the course of maybe as soon as 2 months you will be able to look back on as a memory. And that memory can be positive or negative, but because you're experiencing something very unique and powerful, I feel like it should be positive in nature. And jeez Christ, I was just going to think of something, and now I've totally forgotten it. So,
Well, not even fear, but anxiety, which is its evil twin. That lower level that just kind of makes our neck muscles get tight and our shoulders hunch up.
Yeah.
But again, keeps us from doing all the fun stuff in life. What's going to happen if I do this? What's going to happen? Are bad things going to happen? And I know for myself, I say my life is not defined by the things that happen to me. My life is defined by how I handle them. And so that's where your
Very
faith
good.
comes in. No matter what happens, I'll be able to handle it.
Do you think that's learned or practiced?
Practiced. It's a mantra. You have to say it over and over. You have to remind yourself.
I mentioned on an earlier show that Teddy Roosevelt said, "Man can, in fact, become fearless through the sheer dint of practicing fearlessness." And he was a man who had to overcome many things growing up.
Absolutely.
Terrible asthma.
Everybody
and
does.
stunted-
Everybody has
Yeah.
broken parts
Mhm.
and damaged psyches. And the most important thing is just get out there and keep doing it.
I remember what I was going to say, which was that you also have to accept that moments of fear and anxiety that you have to face, they are often out of your control completely. So, for instance, when we were in Paris, we absent-mindedly booked a hostel in what was later described to us as the single worst neighborhood in Paris, Barbes de Rochard, or something of this nature. But we were coming back from a night out, and my sister had her phone taken right out of her pocket, and there was a frantic scene followed. But what I found was that I was about to raise a hand against this gentleman and realized we were completely surrounded, and that in fact the crowd of people that we thought we were walking through they were all in on it. But we sort of shakenly walked back to the hostel, and in that moment I gave my sister all of my possessions and took €60 in paper, and I just said, "Give me the room key. I'm going to go and see if I can get your phone back." And I don't know what possessed me to do this, so I walked out, and it's dark, and it's the worst neighborhood, just so sketch. And I went to they were gone. They were right outside of a metro stop. And then I thought, well, what are they going to do? They're probably going to go to the next metro stop because they don't want to stay around here in case, on the off chance that we call the police and the police are, respond. They don't want to be right where they were. So, but the night is young. There's still plenty of tourists walking around, so they'll probably be at the next metro stop. So I walked around to a few of the surrounding metro stops. Took me about 25 minutes. I never found the people, but it was still at that moment I did something that I did something that you don't imagine that you have the ability to do in that situation, which was I went out and I faced danger to hopefully find a peaceful solution. And when the pick actually happened, I became very physical, which is something that I am very fortunate to have never experienced. I have never put hands on another human being in anger due to a wrong suffered. I didn't think I had that in me. But in those moments, you discover hidden strengths and hidden lines of reasoning that you didn't realize that you had. So sometimes when you're planning a trip, for example, and you think this could be a dangerous part of the world, like I'm either very soon, let's call within the next 3 years, I'm going to go to South Africa to visit a friend of mine there. And I want to do maybe Zambia or Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and then South Africa, some combination of those. And the first thing that anybody responds with is warnings of danger. But I know that I have experienced moments of danger, moments of physical uncertainty, and I've been able to overcome them. And I'm very happy that I was able to overcome them in a peaceful manner in that regard. But once you have experienced those, you realize that it's not the worst thing in the world. My sister lost a phone, but neither of us were harmed. We were
Right.
able to continue our trip totally fine. The next day, we were in sunny Marseille, swimming in the Mediterranean River
There you
with
go.
beautiful people that we met at the local hostel.
Yep.
And it was just things carry on in this way,
Yep.
and you have to just kind of get
Roll
past
with the
it.
punches.
Exactly.
Yep.
Oh, so bit of advice there from Mary and Andy. What is the one thing I noticed flying into the Bahamas to visit you? On the customs form, it says, please check which island you're visiting. I'm like, shit, I don't know which island she lives on. So I go to the customs official and I said, I don't know which island. I didn't check a box, but I'm flying into Dead Man's Key. She said, oh, Dead Man's Key. And she checks other. And I'm like, oh, I see. So what are the kind of individuals that you run into on the island marked other?
I think on the customs and immigration form, they have the most touristy islands.
Probably. That's what I imagined.
The island where I live deliberately is not one of the most tourist laden. We have a few facilities for visitors, but we're not like the Abacos or North Eleuthera or any of the places, Freeport, Nassau, where you get tons of oil-soaked visitors coming to visit. So, so we're other. We're other. That will be us.
And would you live in that way no matter where it would be in the world? Would you live other?
I am suffering right now in this cold weather. I really, I'm doing my best, kind of trying to take care of my grandmother who's frail.
Mm-hmm.
But I would really like to be back in the Bahamas where it's 84 degrees and I could be setting up a nice full moon beach bonfire for my neighbors and myself and cruising the beach with my puppy dogs and getting PO'd if I have to throw the shorts away and wear long pants because I'm getting real tired of long johns already and it's not even January yet.
I agree. It's harsh. Okay. Looking back, what are a few moments that epitomize your life on the globe as you've been on the move? What are some moments that really made you go, wow, I'm making the right decision doing this? Like, what were some really
some highlights?
Some affirming moments?
Oh, fun stuff. You know, when I was really, really young, when I was 19, when I was coming back from Australia, I actually, my ticket only went to Hawaii. And as I said, I ran into my girlfriend who we'd split up. And she was going on to Los Angeles. And we were supposed to land in Hawaii in the middle of the night. And I didn't want to sleep in the airport. So I stowed away on the plane from Honolulu to L.A., and then they lost my luggage. So that was one of those things that was a lot of fun. And then I saw Robert Redford in the airport. So it was just one of those little mini adventures. What are some, just a lot of it is little stuff, Andy. It's like, I don't know if you got to Carcassonne in France. It's a double-walled city.
Okay.
And they have all these turrets that the archers used to man, and of course fire arrows out of the little slits in the walls. Well, I met this guy from New York, and we broke into one and camped out in one and put candles all around it.
Wow, that's excellent.
Another time when we went to Rio for Carnival, and then went up and stayed in this remote resort, which was built on logs and on this tributary in the Amazon, and that was a delightful trip. But I got an intestinal parasite.
Yeesh,
and went into septic shock.
Okay.
And had to be taken down the Amazon River in the middle of the night. And the prop on the outboard kept getting dented by logs because they couldn't see the logs in the river. And I mean, that was a harrowing experience. And then they took me to the wrong hospital, and I went into shock again. And
oh dear.
But I think it goes back to the people that I've met. I've made some wonderful friends along the road, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. It's taught me a lot about myself and a lot about humanity. Made me feel more connected to the planet and to my fellow human beings, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I hope that I can keep traveling for the rest of my life. There's a lot of places I haven't seen.
It sounds like you're on a track to do that. You just
hope so.
Keep planning. I find often that generally the anthropological theory is that humans all, in this form, just like you and I with the exact same faculties, came out, out of Africa. It's the out of Africa theory, somewhere around Eritrea or Ethiopia, somewhere of this nature. And then we went to French Polynesia and Kamchatka and Russia and Scandinavia and Australia. We went all across the globe. So in the way that food and water and oxygen is necessary for life, I almost feel that traveling has a place in that list of fuels. I think that for a human mind to function at its highest level, it needs travel as a fuel based on the ancient tendency of our ancestors to move about.
It shows us possibilities, Andy. I mean, we can get caught in a tiny little world and in our little ruts and in our little routines. But when we travel, we see all the possibilities for different kinds of foods, different lifestyles, different ways of connecting. And it keeps us growing. I think that being able to continue to learn and to grow as people is essential. When we stagnate, we start dying.
Yes, I totally agree. But if you look, you look at history, some of the biggest events were due to people moving around. You see like the Volkwanderung, the wanderings of the people, which was the explosion of tribes from North Europe down into the Mediterranean and clashing with the Roman Empire. The critical mass of people in Scandinavia exploring, once again in Northern Europe, and then the Viking Age happened. There was too many people to be supported on, from the food that could be provided in Scandinavia, so they went all over the globe. Same thing with the Mongol invasions. And it's these two things tend to be violent because when strangers come to your house, violent things tend to happen. But some of the biggest events, different changes in history have come about just by people saying, well, what's on the other side of that mountain? What's across that forest? What's across that sea? So I think that is so deeply ingrained in our culture, world culture, and in our minds that for me, it's as much about, as much about learning about myself as it is learning about humanity as a whole. And I think that might be why people that you meet on the road tend to be so friendly to you. It's because they understand that you are doing something that is timeless and present in all human history.
Well, I will point out one possibility about
Please do.
The difference between diasporas back then and travel now. In 500, 800, 1,000 years ago, people had to travel. People moved. They relocated in order to be closer to resources. And, of course, now we can fly and truck things all over the place. So, in other words, like where I live in the Bahamas, they literally ran through the food. We used to have seals. We used to have a thing called hutillas. We used to have rock iguanas. The native Indians ate them all. So what did they do? They moved on to different islands. And I think that's why a lot of migrations occurred, is before we became a really solid agrarian society, culture, We used to move to where there was more game,
I guess.
more fertile fields, things like that. But now we can truck or fly it all in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you may be mistaking a lot of people's psyches for your own, Andy. I think a lot of people are very, very content to stay home.
Oh, well,
And that's a good thing for travelers like us. We
yes,
need those home
we
bodies.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
no destination will be bearable.
If everybody was on the road, it'd be a mess, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, at the same time, though, like, that's what I was talking about, those two girls in the Brussels station, was like, your mind immediately wants to be like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. They're American. I'm American. They're loud. Blah. But then at the same time, I'm like, well, they're here.
Exactly.
How many young Americans have no interest in
Sure.
being here?
Sure.
So
The number
I
of
try to give-
Americans that have their passports is really abysmal.
I try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt while traveling, that they are, to it's some degree, my way of thinking, which is that travel equals positive growth.
Expansion.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I think on that point, it's as good a point as any across this wonderful voyage of a podcast to end. Mary, I can't thank you enough for joining me. I learned a lot about you that I didn't know. Heard some wonderful old stories as well as some brand new ones. I hope that you can continue until you will go into the ground. I hope that I can. I hope that anybody who follow in our footsteps can. I hope the whole world can do it as much as possible. So thank you so much for coming. And I can't wait to hear about your 4 tits for tat.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you having me, Andy, and I wish you much success in the podcast. I think it's a great topic, and I know that people will be interested in what you have to say and who you have on.
That means a lot, Mary. Thanks. So that's all for Chasing Diamonds. We will see you next time. Thanks so much.